me now is New York Democratic Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. He's present for some of the Intelligence Committee watchdog Michael Atkinson's closed-door briefing today, and he joins me now from our studios on the other side of town. Congressman, thanks for coming on. First, tell me what you can about Mr. Atkinson's testimony. Have you found it to be helpful? Have you found him to be an honest witness, a man of integrity? What?
I think Michael Atkinson is a man of great integrity. He is the but-for actor here. But for his reporting this to Congress, the efforts of the White House and the Justice Department to cover it up might have been successful. He's extremely thorough. He's extremely credible, in my opinion. He provided a very helpful chronology of his own involvement, provided additional documents. I'm not at liberty to say a lot more, but I can tell you I'm very impressed with Michael Atkinson. Do
you get this, he's supposedly conducted his own investigation of the whistleblower complaint, within a quick period of time. So it's more of an investigation to make sure the allegations aren't made up.
Right.
How confident are you of the investigation he conducted?
Well, let's bear in mind, he's performing a statutory required review within just 14 days to determine initial credibility and whether it satisfies the definition of urgent concern. He did both. He was then stopped in his tracks by an Office of Legal Counsel Justice Department decision, opinion, not worth the paper it's written on, if you ask me, but an OLC opinion that was designed to make him stop, to say you don't have jurisdiction. So his investigation, quote unquote, really was a 14-day review of the allegations as set forth in the whistleblower complaint to determine credibility and statutory applicability for urgent concern. But look, it's held up pretty well. And with the release of the call memorandum and every additional piece of information, it appears as though Michael Atkinson is the one who saw how serious this was and did his job.
Let's talk about Mr. Volker. I don't know how much of his testimony you heard yesterday, and I'm sure you've read his complete opening statement, a very interesting account, thorough. It appears to be he wanted to make it clear he was trying to provide a thorough account of his actions. What kind of witness do you think Mr. Volker was?
Look, I was not able to be there. I was traveling internationally. I got back late last night. I've been briefed on it. I've seen what's been reported on it and been downstairs most of the day today. I can tell you, I think Mr. Volker has some difficult questions to answer. I appreciate his cooperation. I appreciate the text messages he provided. I think his role is complicated in this, but it absolutely confirms the underlying misconduct of the president, and I think that's the point.
What more do you need to start? Ted Lieu, a colleague of yours from California, essentially said you already have enough to write articles of impeachment.
Yeah, I know what Ted means by that. My concern is that this be thorough and fair, of course expeditious. Of course it's important to explain to the American public why we would put the country through something as serious as impeachment. I can tell you for my own part, I don't take any pleasure in this, and I don't think any other Democrats should. The fact is that this is a very difficult decision the Congress is taking. We should get the facts first. I know the Republicans have this half-baked strategy of demanding an immediate impeachment vote. I don't know what their point is. Everyone's going to go on the record soon enough on this. I would think that the person being accused of something would want an opportunity to get the facts out. We're going to do that, but we're going to move fast.
Do you have any political fear of going on the record with a vote to open an impeachment inquiry?
No, none. I have fear of not doing the right thing. I have fear of shrinking from my responsibilities and having to answer to my kids and my constituents why, at the critical moment, I didn't stand up and be counted. I don't have any fear about the political consequences of this, and I hope my colleagues understand the gravity of this situation.
Are you comfortable with how Adam Schiff has handled this whistleblower complaint? We now have reports. It's not, how much contact did he have with the whistleblower or the whistleblower attorney? Do you feel as if all of this was appropriate? Are you concerned that any of this looks like it hands fodder to the other side, that maybe that there was some sort of it looks like they were plotting something or planning the release of this?
I have 100% confidence in Chairman Adam Schiff. I think he's a good man. He's enormously careful and is trying every way he knows how to be thorough and fair, and he's come under a lot of abuse, almost all of it politically motivated. The rhetoric of the president has been outrageous and irresponsible. I'd follow Adam Schiff into any battle. And I'm happy to be in a foxhole with him. I think he's going to come out looking pretty good when all is said and done. And by the way, none of us is perfect, and none of us is going to get every little thing right. But he's a good man trying to do the right thing.
How are you going to combat the Republicans on this if the House Republicans are essentially trying to delegitimize the entire thing? They're not accepting the premise. If they're not going to accept the premise that was the conduct troubling? We can debate about whether it's impeachable, but that we're not even agreeing on that set of facts. How do you combat that?
Oh, I don't know. I imagine they'll find their courage when it's in their political interest to do so. I've done this job long enough, unfortunately, to be skeptical about, the guys on the other side doing the right thing because it's the right thing. They're trying to rally around the president, but the ground's eroding under them every day. The conduct is indefensible. The evidence is overwhelming and largely admitted by the president. Frankly, I don't think they have a strategy. They're hedging. They're grasping at process straws or personal attacks. If I could give them some advice, it would be to keep their mouths shut, because I think they're going to look pretty foolish when all is said and done.
Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney, Democrat from New York, thanks for coming on and sharing your views. Much appreciated. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.